My name is Leonard P. Schmitt.
Can you talk about your life before the war?
And your family.
Surely.
Go ahead.
I was born in 1922 in Palm Bay, Florida. So I'm a Florida cracker. I attended what was then a little two-room school in Palm Bay. There was just two rooms. In one room was the first, second, third grade. In the other room had a blackboard separating. And the other room was fourth, fifth, and sixth. One teacher for the first, second, third, and one teacher for the fourth, fifth, and sixth. In our first grade, when I was in there was 3 students. And our water system was a well, an artesian well. If you know what an artesian well is, it's a sulfur well, outside of the building. If we wanted to drink water, we had to go out and turn the faucet on and get a drink. We didn't have any indoor bathrooms. We had a girls' and boys' bathroom outside. They were like the outside they do out in the boondocks. There was no indoor plumbing. But everybody learned because there was so few in each class. There was, like I say, 3 or 4 in my class, and then that was the first grade. Second grade was only 3 or 4, and the third grade was 3 or 4. So everybody got an enormous amount of attention. And so then, when I was in the third grade, had finished third grade, we had a bad storm one night with lightning and everything. And lightning hit the school, and there was no more school. It burned school down, and so they transferred us to Melbourne, which is 3 miles north of Palm Bay. And so that's where I went through grade school and high school and finished up there in Melbourne. Rode the bus from our home.
What about like moving on, like with starting a family and going actually into the war?
I finished high school in, I can't remember the year now, but anyway, then it was shortly after that World War II broke out. And I was, well, I say shortly, I had worked several places. But when the war broke out in 1942, when the war, yes, the war broke out in 1942, I immediately went in service. So I had started working on the road as a salesman with a wholesale tobacco and candy company when the war, December when they bombed Pearl Harbor. And immediately after that, I thought, well, I better be prepared to go into service because I was just at the right age. And so I went into service in 1942 or 42, somewhere in that area. And I was in there for 3.5, 4 years till the war was over. And in the time that I was there, I flew all during World War II.
What about your family?
Okay, as I said, I was born in Palm Bay, which is just up the road a piece from here. Yeah. We had a large family. It was my brothers and sisters, there was 10 of us, my mother and father. And we lived on a farm, and it was a huge house that we had. And on the farm, we had to do the farm work. Not only when we went to school, we did milking of cows and feeding chickens and what have you before we went to school. When we come home, then we had work to do, you know, at the farm. We had a lot of, Dad insisted that we still do our chores, whether we went to school or not. We still had to do our work. So we had work to do, and then we had cows to milk after we got home. And the chickens had to be fed, and you know, normal farm work, everything had to be done. And so, you know, that never hurt us. In fact, it did us good. We didn't think so at the time. We thought that was terrible and that we were abused because we worked so hard, but really when I look back, it was the best thing that ever happened to us. Nobody ever got in any trouble. We did things that our folks didn't know about. But we won't discuss that at this time. But it was, we had a huge family, but we all got along excellent. And there was 4 or 5 ahead of me, older than I. But now I'm the oldest of the family. And my mother and father are gone naturally. And I'm 83 years old, or 85. I was born in 1922, so this is 209, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So that makes me 87. And when you get to be my age, you kind of forget things, you know. Women forget their age way before now, but but I just my mentality is kind of slipping by the wayside.
What about your children? Do you have children?
I have 3. I had 3. We had a boy. He served. He went to the service, and he was in the service. And when he got out, he was working for Bell Telephone and doing excellent. But he got a rare disease, and it killed him. He died. So he was going with a girl, but he never got married. So I didn't have any children or grandchildren, but I do have some grandchildren from one of my daughters. One daughter has no children. The other daughter had 3 children, 2 children, and they in turn have children. And now one of those are married, so I'll probably have great grandchildren. But it's been a happy time. We've never, I knock on wood and thank God, we never had any real problems.
Can you talk about the war itself and the jobs that you had?
Could I have the plaque that I had there? Maybe I can explain a little bit. This is a plaque that I made up, and I made that, and these are decorations. I was flying, by the way. I flew B-24s as a crew member. I wasn't a pilot. When I wanted to go to pilot school, I go to cadets and go to school, but then everybody else did too. So they took us in rotation, you know, first come, first serve. And I got tired of waiting, so they said, well, if you want to fly, we can send you to gunnery school. And you can go to gunnery school and you can fly as a gunner. But you'll also have to fly as something other, either a mechanic or a radio man or armament man. And I said, well, let's try armament. So I went to armament school, which is maintaining all the armament on the plane, such as the 50 caliber machine guns. You take them apart and put them together and make sure that they're in working condition. You're in charge of the bombs. You work with the fusing of the bombs. And it's all the armament on the plane. That was my job. And then we had one man that was, or a couple of men that were maintenance, were the engineers. They kept the plane flying. And we had a couple of radio operators. They kept contact with other planes and ground and what have you. So I flew 400 hours of what they call combat. Now I flew a lot of hours training, and I trained all over the United States. Most of it was in the West Coast, in the desert country in California. I trained in Texas, I trained in Nevada, and I trained all over. They had us training all over. So we landed in, by way of England. And if you want me to, I'll give you a resume on how we traveled. We went from England, from New England, across the Atlantic over to England. And we flew the northern route, which was the safest. And we landed in, started to land in Scotland. But when we got to Scotland, it was so clouded in. You was what you call socked in. You couldn't get through the clouds. So they said, go to Ireland. So we flew to Ireland. Well, by the time we got to Ireland, we were almost out of gasoline. Now, when you're flying a plane and you're out of gasoline, you haven't got but one way to go. So we flew over Ireland, and we finally saw an opening, and we went down. And we were over Glasgow, and we found a little field there that they'd never seen a B-24, but we landed. And they gave us a hero's welcome and took care of us, and then we waited until we could get orders, and they told us gave us how to get to England. So gave us instructions. In the little book that I wrote up, I told about this. England was under heavy attack by Germany at that time, and they would shoot down anything that flew if you didn't give the proper signals. But they gave us in Ireland the signals of the day, the code for the day, and that code was only good for that day. And we had to give that code over the radio. When they called, identify yourself, the radio operator gave that code, and they would permit you to land in England. If not, they'd shoot you down. But we went into England, and then we stayed there about a week till we could get acclimated. And then we had to fly to Africa. Well, we couldn't fly in the daytime because the Germans were working there. They were keep making sure no airplanes coming that way. So we took off at night, and we flew to Africa and went in and landed in Africa. And then, unfortunately, when we landed, we made a real hard landing, and our nose wheel gave way on the plane. Now, the plane normally flies like this and lands like this, but this time we landed like this. We dug up the runway with our nose. Of course, we couldn't do anything until we got that fixed. So then we decided, we checked in, we had to get enough minor repair to fly to Ismailia, which is just outside of Cairo. So then we could get major overhaul, which we did. So we were on the Suez Canal. They gave us a little hut for the crew on the Suez Canal. And we could go swimming anytime we wanted to, and all we had to do was just wait for them to fix our plane. Well, this going on and on, so the tail gunner, one of the tail gunner, but he and I, we kind of buddied together. We said, let's go into town and go to the Red Cross and see if there's anything happening. So we went in and we met a fellow there. He said, well, would you like to go to Israel? Sure, why not? We weren't very far from Cairo. So I said, well, go into Cairo, go to the Red Cross at Cairo, and they'll give you passes on the train to Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, which we did. We went in by train. Now it's practically a 2-day trip, a long way. So we went into Jerusalem and the Red Cross showed us around. We went through everything in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem. We saw the manger. We saw the Christ, where you've heard of the 14 stations of the cross. We did the same thing as he did, the 14 stations. We saw everything that they had to offer. And then the tail gunner and I was talking to somebody in the main guy in headquarters for Red Cross. He said, how would you like to drive a station wagon back across the Sinai Desert for me to Cairo? That's 500 and some miles. And I said, well, why not? He said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. Take somebody with you. I got 2 Red Cross women that I'm transferring. If you don't mind, take those women with you, so there'll be 4 of you. And if we don't hear from you within 2 days, we'll send out somebody to look for you. Well, driving from Jerusalem across the Sinai Desert to the Suez Canal is 500 and some miles, and it's all desert. You just see nothing but sand. And we drove that one day. We left at 4 o'clock in the morning. We got up and got dressed and had breakfast, and then they escorted us to the border out to the desert, and we started driving. And we drove, and then we had sandwiches, we had water and everything on board, and we stopped and had a break every now and then, and we ate our sandwiches on the run, and we drank water. We pulled into the Suez Canal at 6 o'clock that evening. We drove all the way across the Sinai Desert. So then we went up to Cairo and delivered that station wagon to them in Cairo. Well, they were so thankful that they said, we would like to give you a party on us, and we'll take you out to the Sphinx and out to the pyramids and let you do everything by camelback. Well, it was the tail gunner and I, we were treated like royalty. So the next morning we got up and we went down to where the camels were in a compound, and we got our camels. There was 2 camel herders, I guess you would call them camel herders, took us to the pyramids. And we got off the camels, and they made the camels get down so we could get off, and we climbed up on the pyramid. I understand my daughter went over recently to see the pyramids, and she said they won't allow you to climb up anymore. But we climbed up as high as we wanted to go on the pyramids. And it's hard climbing them because they are huge, huge stones. And, you know, it's kind of hard to climb up on a stone when you don't have anything to hold on to. But anyway, we climbed up anyway. And then we saw the Sphinx. And then we went back to the Suez, to our little camp there, because our plane wasn't ready yet. And then a few days, the other guys we left behind, they come back to Cairo and then come back down there. But it took them 2 days to run the railroad again all the way back. We told them all that we had done, and they were envious. You know, they didn't get to go to the pyramids. They didn't see the Sphinx, all that stuff. But when we got our plane fixed, and then when we took off, I told the pilot, I said, let's circle the town, let everybody see the Sphinx and the pyramids, and so we did. And then we went on, and we went to, oh gosh, so many countries over there that I don't know. If I had a map, I could point them out to you. But then we got into India. And they said, where in the world have you been? we started out, it took us 2 months to fly what normally takes you 2 or 3 days. Oh, yeah. So we spent part of the war sightseeing and doing things we shouldn't have been doing. But it was all legal. I mean, there was no, you know, we weren't goofing off or anything. It was just, we didn't have an airplane. And that wasn't our fault. So the Red Cross director, later, when I was living in Fort Pierce, I was working with a bakery at the time. He came from, he owned a jewelry firm in St. Louis, and he drove down to see me. He and someone of his relatives were with him. They drove down to Fort Pierce to see me, and we spent the day together. But it brought back a lot of memories from then. So then we were in, and our destination was India, so we had to fly to India. And so we flew to India to a town called Bishnupur. It's where the 436 Squadron 7 bomb group was stationed. The 1 squadron was stationed there. They had 4 squadrons in the group. And I flew with the 436 Squadron for 400 and some hours. You had to fly 400 hours of combat before they would release you to go back home. And I flew 400 hours. Some of one mission I'll tell you about was, we were the only crew that had flown, well, we were the only group. We flew to what is now Thailand, and we bombed a bridge at Thailand. And it was a 14-hour trip from our squadron down there and back. 14 hours in an airplane is, you're pretty tired when you get back. And it was one of the longest trips that had been made up to that period of time, and we bombed this bridge. Unbeknown to us, it was called the bridge over the River Kwai. Have you ever heard of it? It was being built by American prisoners of war. And we bombed it and we tore it up. And little did we realize we had no, if headquarters or G2, which is security, if they knew that they were prisoners of war, they're working there, they certainly never told us about it. But we bombed that bridge, and the Japanese were pretty upset about it. And then we bombed a lot of different places. I flew for 400 hours of combat. And I flew the hump. Have you ever heard of the hump? I flew the hump several times carrying gasoline to troops. We converted our planes into gasoline carriers. We put on as many barrels, we didn't have any bombs. It wasn't that we couldn't get the bombs, it was that we wanted to take gasoline, so we would take as much gasoline as we could possibly get on those B-24s. Now, they're not designed to be tankers. They were designed to bomb. So we carried extra bomb bay tanks in the bomb bay. And those tanks would hold 400 gallons apiece. And we would fly what's known as the hump. If you've never flown, if you think you've never flown, you have never flown until you fly the hump. The hump is probably littered with airplanes from India to China. It was the most dangerous. I would rather fly a mission with a lot of anti-aircraft firing at me and the bomb the burst breaking around and breaking around you, than I would to fly the hump. The hump was such that you would have up and down drafts. And you would be flying at, you had to fly at, I hate to be absolutely certain, but it was somewhere around 14,000. You had to fly at that because the peaks, you would fly into the mountains if you didn't fly that low. But they had up and down drafts, and we'd be flying at 17,000, 18,000. And all of a sudden, whoosh, the bottom would fall out. And the altimeter would spin like this, and you'd be at 13,000. Look around, there's a peak over there, and there's a peak over there, you know. But we lost some planes that weren't lucky like we were. But we carried gasoline to China, and we kept the China boys going with gasoline, and then we also bombed, and we bombed all the various targets throughout Burma. Now, I was privileged to be one of the first crews that ever landed in Burma. And it wasn't because we wanted to, it's because we had to. I don't know whether you've ever heard of Merrill's Marauders or not, but Merrill's Marauders were an outfit that they had no fear. I don't think they feared the devil himself. They were good soldiers, and they fought the Japanese tooth and nail. And they were in the process of building a runway outside of Mandalay. They had worked their way in and were working there, and they had all equipment dropped to them. And they'd built enough of a runway to get gliders in there, and they had virtually built behind the lines of the Japanese. We had a plane problem on one trip over to China. We had no place to go. We knew we were going down. That was inevitable. And you don't want to parachute unless you have to. But they had built this airstrip in this, I forget the name of the town, but they built this airstrip, and so we landed on it. So we were the first plane to ever land in Burma. B-24. And after we got down, and well, then the engineer that was on, he was able to fix the problem. But I'll never forget, have you heard of General Stilwell? General Stilwell was quite famous. I've got some of my books at home. He was the instigator of the war in China. He was fluently Chinese. He was an American, but he spoke and directed Chinese fluently. And he was there at Missional. It was a little place called Missional. And he came in there. And he came over and he says, "Get that GD Big Bird the hell out of here. All you're doing is drawing in Japanese." And the Japs they would give anything to be able to get that plane. So our engineer, he says, "Well, General, I know you're the boss, but damn it, I want to get out of here just as bad as you want us out of here. And I'll get out of here when that GD plane will get off the ground, and not before." Of course, you don't speak to a general in that manner. Well, needless to say, he was reprimanded when he got back, but the general was man enough to say, "Well, under the circumstances, I take my hat off to the man." So it was quite an experience, and the general was, he was a real man. But anyway, I completed my tour. It was an unknown factor, the unknown fact that when you completed 400 hours of combat, you were eligible to go home. So I completed my 400 hours, and they said, "Well, we're going to ground you." The one person that has authority over everybody is the flight surgeon. What he says goes. It doesn't make any difference what anybody else says. The flight surgeon says, "That man is not fit to fly." He don't fly. It's like that. He is the flight surgeon dictates the policy as far as physical ability. So after 400 hours, they shipped us home. And we got home, and it was, I was stationed in a couple of various places as an instructor, and when you get to be 85, you forget a lot. And I can't bring back my memory to tell you exactly where it was. But I was an instructor for a while, and then I finally got discharged.
What about your medal?
Oh, this right up here would be your left-hand corner. This is an air medal that was given to me. I've made this myself for my decoration. I have it on the wall. This is a patch that we wore. This is the 10th Air Force. And this up here is CBI. It stands for China, Burma, India. And like I say, that was the Air Force number. During the war, we had several Air Force. The Air Force number 2 was stationed in the central part of the United States. The number 4 was stationed, I forget whether it was the Northeast or the West Coast, but anyway, it was divided into 4 sections. And each theater of operation, like England, that theater was 8, I believe, was the theater number. And don't hold me to those numbers because I don't really remember. But 10 was India. 14 was China. And CBI, which is this, was the China, Burma, India theater of operations. So we had this and this on our shoulder sleeves. This is a good conduct medal that I was given after 200 hours of combat. No, this is an air medal, excuse me. This is a piece of shrapnel. Now, I saved that after taking it out of my turret. It broke the glass right by my head. This is shrapnel from anti-aircraft fire. They fire these 105 millimeter shells at you, and they get up to your altitude and burst. Well, that's like throwing all kinds of projectiles. Those projectiles will tear a plane apart or obviously kill you. Well, it throws off, a burst will throw off all kinds of projectiles all around, and that's one of them that came in the turret with me to keep me company. And so I kept it. This, as I said, was the CBI. This is the famous dog tags. Everybody wore dog tags. And on that dog tags gives your home address, your full name, and your religious preference, you know, whether you're Protestant or Catholic or Jewish or what have you, it shows on there. And that's in case you got wounded and were not able to speak. This is the Eastern Command, and this one was the good conduct, I believe. That was a good conduct. This was a Distinguished Flying Cross. And this was the wings that I wore. Of course, needless to say, my wife wore them for me. After we were engaged and I was still in the service, she wore those wings. And this is the Presidential Citation, which was awarded to us for some of the good deeds we did to the Japs. This was the Distinguished Flying Cross. It has a little oak leaf on it, which means that they give you the Distinguished Flying Cross. I get mixed up. Distinguished Flying Cross twice, but in place of giving it to you you don't wear two ribbons, you wear an oak leaf cluster. If I was awarded that award again, I'd have another oak leaf cluster. So you can tell by the oak leaf clusters if you've been awarded once, twice. If it was once, you just have the plain. Twice, you have one. And if you had 4 or 5, and if you see an old timer, you'll see sometimes a lot of clusters. This was the lapel pin for my suit, my civilian suit. And this was a pin that my son gave to me. And this was a good conduct. Oh gosh, I really like that. They didn't know. That was a good conduct medal. And this was a ribbon up here. And that was the Asiatic Command. That's what that signified. I guess we've covered it all.
Do you know how many years, like in total, that you served in there?
I went in August of what was the year? August of 1942. And I was in for 2.5, 3 years. Well, yeah, 3 years. I came out in 1945, August. I came out in September of 1945.
Can you talk about the final days in the war?
In where?
In the war.
The final days of the war. I was fortunate enough that when I had completed my 400 hours, the Air Force had established a rule or regulation that no one went back over again until all those who hadn't served had gone over. So they brought me back, and since I had had some experience, they made an instructor out of me. That's the reason poor English made an instructor. I was made an instructor. So although I had not attended any engineering school, I had flown so much that I qualified as engineer on the thing. So I flew as an engineer with training classes. And some of them they would be training a pilot to become a first pilot. But they needed an engineer because they had to have, when you took a B-24, which is a four-engine bomber, which was the biggest bomber that we had until the B-29 came along, you had to have 2 pilots and an engineer and a radio man on that plane before you could take it off the ground. So the engineer's job was to see that the plane stayed in the air. That was your job. When you were on the ground, you checked everything, made sure there was ample gasoline, ample everything that it takes to make a plane fly. And when you get in the air, you help the pilot. He is so intent on flying that plane, he doesn't have time to look at his instrument panel. So you'll read the instruments to him. You stand or close to him so that you read the instruments panel to him, so he knows he's delving on flying that plane and making a good takeoff. It's your job as an engineer to see that the plane stays in the air. And that's what I was doing when I came back. And I was in Smyrna, Tennessee. That's where they sent me. And I was flying with returnee pilots who were training student pilots. And I was an engineer. And I flew there and completed my time in service in Smyrna, Tennessee.
Can you talk about coming home and your family's reaction to it?
Well, it's hard to explain. You know, my mother there was 4 of us in the service. And all mothers don't like it too much when their sons are over there. And I was flying, which is dangerous, and she knew it. And I had another brother that was, he was just started, and he was in going to school to fly. And I had one brother that was in the Seabees. In case you don't know what Seabees are, they build runways and build facilities for military. And then I had a brother that was in ordnance. He handled all the bombs, or not, he didn't personally handle all the bombs, but he was in the squadron and handled all ordnance. And ordnance consisted of mostly bombs that somebody had to put those bombs in the plane. Somebody other than the people flying, because we had our own work and we didn't have time to do that and get a night's sleep and fly too. So you have an ordnance department, and I had one brother that was in the ordnance department. So there was, I had three brothers besides myself were in the service. And of course my mother was quite proud of us. Like I said, we were born and raised in Palm Bay. And I will never forget, I came home in well, I was over there for 2 years, so I came home in 1944. The war was still on, so a lot of people over there. And I had been over and come home, and I got home Christmas Eve. And I'm Catholic. And I know you understand, they have a midnight mass.
Yeah.
And it was in Palm Bay at the St. Joseph, which is now the Catholic Church's historical monument. And I was born and raised in that church, or to attend that church. So when I went to church that night, midnight mass, and I walked in, and everybody saw me. And it was, I felt conspicuous. There was so many eyes on me. And after the mass was over and we went outside, everybody wanted to talk to me, everybody. And I know my mother and father were just as proud as they could be. And that was my introduction back to civilization. Because I spent all my time overseas in India. And India's, no, I don't mean to be detrimental or talk about India, but it's not my favorite place to live. Famine was quite furious, and it was heartbreaking and devastating to see a child starve to death, and I saw him. And it was just, you can't describe it. It just made you want to give everything you had to those people to get them off the ground. They would be starving. Their little arms would be this big around. The famine was on. We don't know, we have no idea what famine is all about. It just makes you want to, cry sometimes when you see the famine that goes on in this world. And so that's my story of how I went overseas and what I did.
What jobs did you do when you came home? Did you work?
I went back to, I was with a wholesale candy and tobacco firm. It was a firm run by one person. It was a one-person firm. And while I was gone, my boss, who owned it, did that, and we sold all kinds of tobacco products and candy and cigars and everything to service stations, grocery stores, whatever. Well, I took up, well, in fact, I got letter after letter. We'll be glad when you get home, because my boss was wanting to get off the road. He was getting to be an old man, like I am now. And so he wanted me to take over. So when I got back, I went right to work for the, it was Tucker Candy Company is what it was, out of Melbourne. And so I worked that for a couple of years, but I couldn't see much future in it. And a job came by that the salesman for a bakery company, bread company. It was the old Bell Bread. I don't know whether you ever heard of Bell Bread or not, but anyway, he wanted me to go work for him, and I did. And I stayed with him, and then eventually Bell dissolved, and it was taken over by Dandy Bread. I don't know whether you've heard of Dandy or not, but Dandy is quite a famous bread on the market. And so I worked my way up. I went from salesman to supervisor to general sales manager, and then I was put in charge of going to various plants. We had 7 plants scattered over the United States, one in Indiana, one in Georgia, one in New Jersey, and 4 in Florida and Texas. I think we had one. But I would go to visit those plants and put in new features of sales and see that everything was running right, what have you. And then later, they wanted me to run the plant in Fort Pierce. We had a plant in Fort Pierce, so I took over the plant in Fort Pierce. And I ran that plant until Flowers Baking Company bought us out. And I was then almost 65 years old. So as soon as I become 65, Flowers kept me on working the Fort Pierce plant. Flowers is a good bakery outfit. They do a tremendous job. And they have bakeries all over. I don't know how many they have now, but it's 14 or 15 something. But they do a vast volume of bakery business. And so I was what's known as a double dipper. I get a retirement check from Flowers Bakery, and I get one from Bell Bakeries. I also get Social Security. So I was a double dipper.
Do you have any advice for anybody who would be watching this or hearing your story?
Well, my only advice would be simply do your best whenever you can. And you can't fail. If you'll just do your best, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be better than anybody else. Do your best, and you'll never fail. And I kind of live by that. And I hope I have taught my children. Both of my son died, as I said, but my daughters are very successful. My oldest daughter, she's now retired. She went right on up the ladder with Allstate, and she retired from Allstate. My youngest daughter is a registered stockbroker, and she's gone up the ladder with with the companies she's been with, and she's very, very successful. She has a, in the stockbroker business, it's kind of cutthroat. And she's got a good following. And she's good. She knows her stock. And when I ask her a question, it's on the tip of her tongue. So thanks to her mother, she's been well taught.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close?
I enjoy this. I enjoy it. They say, I've heard it said that people don't like to talk about their war experiences. Well, my experiences, I know I killed people, but I did it for my country. And I had a good experience. I had a lot of experiences. I don't regret going over and dropping bombs on the enemy. I don't regret it. I'll do it again. Anybody threaten this country, I'll bomb them just as sure as I'm sitting here. And I have no regrets. So that's the way I look at life.